Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of the Young Humanitarians. My name is George Mullens, and as per always, it's really fantastic to have you all on board. So for this week's edition of the podcast, we're going to be discussing space policy. However, before that, I'm really delighted to announce that we've signed a partnership agreement with the Centre for Youth and International Studies, for which we have the founder and director, Andrei Cursaru, speaking. So for this week's edition of the podcast, we're going to be delving into space policy. As I referred to at the start, this is an increasingly important area of international affairs. So to briefly just introduce Andrei, so he's the director of CYIS, and he's responsible for the growth of the centre to one of the world's leading organisations to provide facts and analysis on future global security, development, and humanitarian threats. He holds a BA from Lancaster University in Politics and Economics in the United Kingdom and an MA in International Security. Prior to assuming the directorship of CYIS in 2020, he served in several international security-related IGOs, most notably the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as the European Commission. How are you doing, Andrei?
Good morning, George. It's a pleasure to be part of the Young Humanitarian podcast, and thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Sure, maybe. So before we actually get into the space policy, would you like to maybe speak a little bit about CYIS and the work that it is that you do?
Of course, George. CYIS started from the vision that we want to create a sustainable world for the next generation of decision makers. And together, we've put our powers together at the European Commission to have the leading thought leaders in our group to create this think tank. And since then, we're now amounting to a team of 14 individuals from different IGOs, focusing in the political, military, economic, environmental, and the humanitarian dimension in different areas of thought. Together, we are focusing on different contents, from blogs to podcasts to video recordings. And we are here to have discussions with key decision makers so that we can actually have our vision achieved for a more sustainable world.
Yeah, the work that they do is really incredible. So to all the listeners, please do visit their website. There will be links in the description. They've also got, as Andrei said, they've also got podcasts that they're going to be releasing. So definitely give them a listen. Really fantastic work, all young people. So very much the target audience, to say the least. But let's go straight into the discussion. So space policy is not often spoken about as an emerging area in international security. It is increasing in prevalence, of course, at least in comparison to cybersecurity. So can you outline for our listeners what are the main international mechanisms and UN agencies principally that deal with space policy?
No, excellent question, George. I would say first and foremost is to discuss space as an emerging area. So this domain has become an area of great interest to me, given the really emergence of a second Cold War, in the sense that we have the ideological fight between the US and China. And focusing on this, whether this is now a new domain altogether, I would say that this is not really the case, as looking into the Cold War, there have been already aspects where there have been the intercontinental ballistic missiles technology being integral for both the nuclear race and the space race. So all this has been really the foundation of creating international mechanisms and also UN agencies that could actually prevent threats within space. So the main international authority on space is, without a doubt, UNOSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And the main mission of UNOSA is to promote and also to facilitate peaceful international cooperation in outer space. It also works to establish the legal and regulatory frameworks for space activities and assist developing countries for using space and technology for sustainable socioeconomic development. From UNOSA, we have the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, And this is now a forum for the development of international space law. And most notably, as someone who's really looking into all these legal aspects of law, is the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space. This is one of many treaties that have been established by this committee. And they really put the foundations and principles on how to use space as part of the international community.
Fantastic. I mean, one of the main ways in which recently space policy has come back to the front is through President Trump's creation of the Space Force. And so far, the Biden administration has actually kept a lot of these policies. So could you outline why was Space Force created, and is it going to have an increasingly important role in the future?
Definitely, George. I would say that the question really is, why is space important to begin with, to really understand why Space Force was created. It goes without saying that space has changed dramatically over the last few years. We see many more actors entering space, the democratization of space, if you will, being that space capabilities are becoming cheaper and more accessible, while also more vulnerable to incidents and debris, as well as margin action. There's also that the security environment has dramatically changed, as over the last few years, the rule-based international order and international security have increasingly been threatened and also contested by malign actors. And now also countries have become increasingly reliant on missions with the development of new technologies. And these are incredibly important for communications, for crisis response, for disaster relief, even for counterterrorism intervention. And this is really how Space Force actually began out of the changing need of the international space and also the changing security environment. So now the US Space Force is one of many legacies of Donald Trump. I would say one of the most beneficial ones that actually came out of this. And the US Space Force has been directed by Congress to maintain and expand the US fleet of advanced military satellites that form the backbone of US global military operations. And the importance of the satellites are of vast importance to the US military, given the focus that it can allow instantaneous communication across all battle zones, identify enemy positions and movements, track weather patterns, guide navigational systems, and also allow for precision strikes. So this really were the main aspects why Space Force was created. Now, regarding Biden's relationship with Space Force, this is a really interesting aspect to look into. While President Biden is very notable of reversing many of the Donald Trump era legacies, it actually has maintained this. It was very much that the main reason why Space Force, first of all, from just a domestic political lens, why it will not go away, is very much that this will have to go for an act of Congress, and this will not allow Space Force to go anytime soon. However, we also had the Secretary of Defense discussing about space widely, and also Biden as well, saying that it is a really great strategic importance. They've not really emphasized Space Force as the new military branch of the US. However, they do see the strategic importance into this.
Absolutely. I mean, so Greg Grant, a Pentagon official in the Obama administration, noted in an article that there's been a dawning realization that our outer space systems are quite vulnerable. So what are the main ways in which member states have aimed to protect their assets in outer space? And also, what are the main challenges to actually doing this?
I think to go on Greg Grant's point is the discussion on ASAT, so anti-satellite capabilities. And this is very much linked to the democratization of space, as you don't have actors such as the United States anymore, but you also have China, India, and Russia that have developed this anti-satellite capabilities. And this is really very much linking to two branches of threats that would actually require a space weapons response, and those that do not. On those that would require a space weapon response, you would have threats to small satellite which are very much just small, lightweight satellites, just making space accessible to an increasing number of countries. You also have satellites in low orbit, short LEO, that are also vulnerable to laser illumination that could potentially cause the loss of power due to the solar degradation. And you also have the possibility of a nuclear explosion to knock out virtually all satellites in low orbit, which is incredibly threatening to the resilience of the alliance or who would be impacted. However, this is like a more blurry part, and this is also interesting with this new domains such as cyber as well. What is the actual response when the threat is not as high? There, of course, will not be any casualties. However, there will be interferences within national intelligence, within economic affairs, within just our day-to-day lives. So these are things that would not be addressed with space weapons, such as the jamming of satellite links, the control of high-resolution imagery, or also the orbital debris. So all these aspects altogether really are the threats that are within space. However, the responses are not really clearly defined on how can we actually have a collective or national response to threats that are either natural or also that may be used by malign actors, either by state actors such as China or Russia, or non-state actors by hacking satellites or just destroying the space infrastructure.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, so one of the main risks that is caused by this escalation in outer space is, as you've alluded to previously, there are lots of UN mechanisms that basically state that that space is for all of humanity, whether that's for scientific purposes or other. And in the past, there have been attempts to bring weapons into space through, for example, the Star Wars program of the Reagan administration. However, this ended in failure as officials recognized that it was incredibly dangerous to bring nuclear warheads into space, rightly so. And if, for example, you're to lose control of that nuclear warhead in space, that can be a pretty severe risk, to say the least. So, as you've rightly noted, there's been more of a move towards anti-satellite weaponry. So, what are the main developments that we've seen regarding these weapon systems?
Great question, George. I would say that to go into space and thinking about nuclear weapons, we really have to talk about deterrence theory. So essentially, space is a bit like nuclear weapons, because without nuclear weapons and without space, we would be back to an industrial era, indiscriminate by the total demolition of war. The idea is that a major surprise attack by an adversary on space capabilities could actually significantly undermine the credibility of nuclear deterrence. For example, by compromising the ability of a nation or of an alliance to detect launches on intercontinental ballistic missiles. And it could also be a precursor to global conflict. So this is a really good question. How do you deter such attacks? By focusing on deterrence theory, there are two aspects. It's deterrence by denial, deny adversaries the benefit it is seeking, or deterrence by punishment, by ensuring that the cost for its actions will be prohibitive for the adversary. And going to like the developments on anti-satellite weaponry. So this has been a technology that's been greatly expanded in the early 2000s, especially focusing on the US government that has adopted a more aggressive approach to space security and control by drafting documents that envision a restructuring of the military commands, and also the deployment of ASAT weapons and space-based weapons. So I would say that three types of weapons that are particularly interesting to look into. You have the satellite jamming, which is interfering with radio communications between a satellite and users on the ground. You also have maneuvering satellites, satellites that could approach and potentially touch satellites with the target's cooperation. And this could be the basis for ASAT weapons capable of causing temporary or permanent damage to the satellites. And you also have ground-based lasers can interfere with satellite sensors or damage a satellite's body. So all these are really threatening to the infrastructure of the nation having its satellite systems. However, depending who you'd ask, it may be actually beneficial in terms of deterring espionage on one's territory. So this would be the main developments into anti-satellite weapons, and also thinking really about nuclear warfare in space as a whole.
Yeah, great response. So when we're looking at space as a domain for international security, we of course have to consider the role of China and not just the US. And at the moment, Chinese-American relations are not the best, to say the least. And so regarding space technology, of course, China has been studying American military policies, especially in its invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, in which battlefield successes were very much seen as rooted in space dominance, thanks to satellite-guided bombs, cruise missile, as well as the vast quantity of military intelligence that they're able to gain through space photography. So in what ways has China's space policies changed over time?
No, this is a really interesting and also very pertinent question. So it goes without saying that everything that I say at this stage is very much a personal opinion, not reflective of any organization. It is very much that China as a whole has become increasingly self-reliant over the years. This is very much so that it has been actually excluded out of international negotiations and international space cooperation in a very ironic sense. So the US has actually excluded China from this by banning the visa of scientists, by not allowing them on the ISS space shuttle, and it was very much that this has made China self-reliant by making its space system, by having the CSS, the counterpart, you would say, of ISS. And by this, China is rapidly taking up pace. It is developing itself as a space power. And while not widely known or discussed outside of China, the culture has really grown parallel to the country's space industry. The ideologies surrounding Chinese space exploration, they're being steadily cultivated by the nation, with the media really just focusing as part of this domestically. And according to China's main space actors, there are three key spirits or also historic influence that make this emerging space culture really quintessential to Chinese. There's the traditional spirit, the two bombs, one satellite spirit, and also the crude space spirit. So the traditional spirit is very much refers to the traditional Chinese civilization, the culture and the values which constitute the bedrock of contemporary China. The two bombs and one satellite spirit refers to the 1960s, when China first achieved the successful atomic bomb and the intercontinental ballistic missile tests, as well as the launch of its first artificial satellite. Lastly, the crude spirit refers to China's Taikonaut program. This is Chinese for astronaut, particularly the launch of China's first taikonaut in 2003, which cemented China as a member of the prestigious Crewed Spaceflight Club alongside the United States and Russia. So now, what can we say about China landing its rover and becoming the second nation in the world after the United States on Mars? Would China actually pose a threat to the current US-led order? I would say not so much. China is a rising power indeed. Economically, it has risen greatly. However, the chances is very much that it only wants to cement itself as a regional power, as part of rising powers theory. That it doesn't want to contest the actual hegemony. It actually wants to have an equal sitting table as part of the international order. Of course, this is not myself defending any of the actions or supporting. However, it is very much that we actually take this from a very practical lens, and we see that China actually wants to cement itself as a strong power with its people, that it wants to really have the Communist Party cement as a centralizing force in China. Reason for which why the rover landed on the 100th birthday anniversary of the Communist Party. So there's a lot of internal propaganda that really outweighs the soft power influence that would go. And yes, it would be used for space exploration. And yes, indeed, space exploration can lead to more than that, from the terraformation of Mars to actually creating infrastructure in this as a geostrategic area, as we become an interplanetary system, as a civilization. However, I think we are not at this stage to think about this. Of course, it is always good to have this long trend foresight analysis and to like analyze these threats. However, at this stage, at least, China wants to cement itself as a strong domestic actor, with the Chinese government, the Communist Party, wanting to maintain the unity of the country.
Absolutely. I mean, so I mean, this next question is also kind of future focused as well. I mean, how do you see this playing out in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years? I mean, obviously, it can be a bit difficult to predict exactly what is going to occur, but how do you think this is going to go, in your opinion?
Excellent question, George. So this very much links to my current article that I'm writing for my think tank, the new frontier, China and US on space. The aspect is, as discussed, the Sino-American Space Corporation has always been shaky, and it would be very important to actually improve these ties in order to actually maintain an equal level playing field. As this would actually help the US and Russia de-escalate the issues they were having during the Cold War. So during the so-called Second Cold War, which is very much an ideological battle between democracy and autocracy, it would be really interesting to actually de-escalate an emerging and potential Sino-Russian axis in space, and also really serve as a bargaining chip to help and sustain other areas of cooperation. So while China and the US seem to really clash themselves in virtually every aspect of space, this would be a really important moment for them actually to bind their cooperation and exchange information. Of course, exchanging technology would actually also be a potential threat to themselves. However, there's an important area to actually understand that China wants to maintain itself as a domestic power, potentially as a regional power, and that it would be a really smart way to actually de-escalate this geopolitical rivalry. The aspect on technology as itself is that there are legitimate concerns indeed that this collaboration could actually lead to technology sharing and leads to unfair advantages for one of the two parties. However, we have to really understand that the US enjoys a significant leadership in some space technologies, including satellites, and much of that technology is proprietary, shared with no other countries in the area of human spaceflight. However, we really have to understand that we really have to have a gradual collaboration with China in the next 5 and 10 years to actually enable ourselves to become an interplanetary civilization, but also to avoid any de-escalation of conflict, such as using nuclear weapons in space.
Brilliant. So just basically the final question to you. I mean, obviously the listeners are primarily young people. So what are your final messages to them? We've spoken in abundance about some of the very scary threats that we are seeing, but it'd be great to leave with let's say a note of positivity. And also, where can they find out more of your work, whether that's with CYIS or others?
No, thank you very much for this opportunity, George, to be part of the Young Humanitarians. It has been a really great pleasure. On my side, as a key message to all our young listeners as part of the Young Humanitarian and also our CYIS audience, is very much to stay curious. So by being curious, we'd actually be able to really identify this emerging trends as part of this new areas of interest, and really much cooperating with one another. Very much having a trust in cooperation to actually enable the advancements in these areas. Of course, we do not have to be naive and really have to understand that every country has its national interest. However, as young individuals, will become the future decision makers of this world, and it is very much important for us to have these key discussions for us to really cement the principles that will govern our lives in the next 10 years plus. And if we really want to have a more sustainable world in space, we would really have to discuss aspects such as space debris, such as using space for peaceful uses such as exploration and research. And by this, I encourage all the speakers to really advocate and to raise their voice, as every voice of a young person matters. And I think the Young Humanitarians has really embodied this by having key speakers as part of your podcast to express their opinions and to engage in the strategic discussions. As really one thing that young people show the most is the creativity, the lateral thinking in key strategic matters, and really just the foresight and actually also the grounded reality of how their life will be impacted in the next 10 years. And this is really important for key decision makers, where it is now from the US government to the Chinese government, or from other international bodies, even in UNOSA. It would be important to go on this. And on our side at CYIS, as part of the political military program, we have the cyber and security program, and it is dealing with emerging disruptive technologies. And myself, of course, as the founder, I'm very much focusing on the maintenance and the growth of the organization. However, I am actively involved into analyzing nuclear warfare trends, on focusing myself on space-based capabilities, and also AI, given my work as a special assistant at NATO AC team. I really just want to emphasize that everything that has been said here has been a reflective out of my personal passion and public information, and not reflective of the organization that I'm working for. George, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to take part in future strategic discussions as part of the Young Humanitarian. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Andrei. You're currently in New York, so I'll let you enjoy the rest of your long weekend there. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll speak soon.